Shortly after it first released the AJAX tools for Visual Studio and ASP.NET projects, Microsoft announced the AJAX Control Toolkit. ACT was an open-source project, one of Microsoft's first, if not the first, that eventually provided more than 40 controls and control extenders, along with some wonderful features for dynamic websites. Microsoft developed some of the controls, and the ASP.NET community members developed the rest. You have full access to the source code with a liberal license for its use, so you can learn from the code, extend it, and incorporate it into your own projects. Despite undergoing some fits and starts of activity, ACT seemed to have a pretty bright future. It was built on the Microsoft AJAX library, which is a rich JavaScript library and framework designed to mimic the .NET framework. The library started out as a worthy competitor to jQuery, but Microsoft eventually abandoned development of its own library in favor of supporting jQuery. Now, although their AJAX library is still available for use and is still the underlying JavaScript library for some of its technologies, it's going to receive no further development effort. So it really leaves ACT as a dead end. Now, ACT is still available with all of the source code, so that you can use it as long as you wish. But because Microsoft will not be moving it forward, ACT is not something that you should use for new development. And you should seriously consider migrating existing pages and sites away from ACT when you do any kind of major upgrades. But what are you going to migrate to? Well, thankfully, that's a pretty easy question. You should migrate to jQuery, of course. I bet you saw that coming. jQuery is a great JavaScript library, and it has a rich community of plugins that do just about everything that ACT can do, often a lot better. You might have to do a little bit of research to find the plugin that works best for you, rather than having them all in a single convenient toolkit. But jQuery.com makes it pretty easy to find what you need. Now, all of the plugins that I'm going to use in the following examples are included in the scripts folder of the toolkit.sln sample project and are available from the plugins section of jQuery.com. If you find that a particular plugin doesn't work for you, it's almost certain that there are 5 others that will work just fine. And if you can't find one that does what you need, it might be a great opportunity to write your own and contribute it to the community. So what I'm going to do now is explore a few representative samples of how you can substitute jQuery and plugins for some of the features in the AJAX Control Toolkit. And the first one that I'm going to talk about is watermarking. Watermarking is a really cool, useful, and interactive way to prompt a user for the information that should go into a text box on a form. When the input element is empty, the watermark text appears. And it's usually grayed out, some sort of light gray text. When the user enters the field, the watermark text disappears. And whatever the user types in that text box appears in the field. You can determine the styling of the watermarked element both when the watermark text appears and when the user's text appears. The AJAX Control Toolkit has a really nice text box watermark control. It's actually an extender that you can attach to a server-side ASP.NET text box control. So let's take a look at that ACT control, as well as how you can replace it using a jQuery plugin. Here's the ASP.NET AJAX Control Toolkit sample site. It's located on the ASP.NET website. And this gives you an example of using all of the controls and extenders within the AJAX Control Toolkit. The one that we're interested in right now is the text box watermark. So I'll click on that, and you get the sample page. And as you can see, when I enter a field, the watermark text goes away, and in fact there's a little bit of styling. And when I leave that field but don't enter anything, I get the watermark back. And so if I type in here Kylie and submit, it then reads the text. And you can see the behavior of that text box watermark extender. And then it also has some information down here, as well as information about the properties of it. Okay, so that's the ACT version of the control. Really nice control. It's one of the better ones within the toolkit. All right, so let's go back over the sample project here. This is a toolkit.html that includes all of the samples of the ACT replacements that I'm going to show you. Now, there are a whole bunch of watermark jQuery plugins, but one of the simplest and easiest to use is the Tiny Watermark jQuery plugin. You can use this with any input or text area element by specifying the watermark CSS class and the text that you want to display when the input element is empty. You have the option of supplying the watermark text either as the value of the title attribute of the element or as the second argument to the watermark method. And I do both within this page. When the user submits the form, the plugin removes the watermark text. Now, the plugin itself is a mere 623 bytes, and that's not even minified or compressed. So I'll go ahead and run the page to show it to you. So here's that first example. So I can enter the field here, type in Don Kiley, and I can enter the various other fields, and you can see the behavior pretty much mimics the text box watermark control. All right, go back over to the sample here. Okay, here's the HTML code that implements that watermarking sample. So it's just using 3 different input elements of type text, different sizes, and they have the class watermarked. And I also have a watermarked alt, and I'll talk about that reason why I named that a different class or gave that a different class in just a moment. Remember that I mentioned that you can provide the text that appears as part of the watermark either declaratively using the title attribute here, and that's what I do for the first 2 elements. But then I do it programmatically for this 3rd element. All right, now the page uses this watermark class in order to set the background color and the color of the font. This color is officially pale canary yellow, and this color here is a medium gray. So that's the appearance of the watermark text. That's the style that determines what the watermarked text box looks like. All right, so the crux of the watermarking is in these 2 statements. The first statement here watermarks the name and email text boxes on the page, the first 2 text boxes, using the title attribute's value as the watermark text. So it's just executing the watermark method. This is part of that watermark plugin, and specifying that it should use that watermark CSS style that I just showed you. And it's using this class. All of the first 2 elements that I showed you, text elements, have this class assigned to it. And this is telling it to use this class for the appearance of the watermarking. And that it gets the text from the title attribute of those first 2 elements. So here's where I gave that 3rd text element a different class name, because I needed to specify both the watermark style as well as programmatically the watermark text. So these are just 2 different ways of doing the same thing. In general, on a single page, you'll want to pick one and stick with it. I generally favor this method where the title attribute provides the watermark text, only because then you have a clear separation of behavior from the attributes of the element. But again, that's personal preference. Now you can use whatever class names you want to identify the input elements to be watermarked, as well as the name of the CSS style. And the plugin really is surprisingly functional for being such an incredibly small size. Very easy to use. Putting rounded corners on elements is a desirable feature to soften the look of a web page, but it's surprisingly hard to do well across all browsers. Both because there's so many ways to accomplish the effect and so many variations among browsers. Web designers have long resorted to using images, even though CSS and other web technologies support rounded corners. Images tend to be the easiest way to accomplish the effect. ACT has a nice rounded corners extender that applies the effect to HTML elements, letting you vary the appearance by changing the radius of the corner, which corners are rounded, and other options, giving it a lot of flexibility for creating a very nice page appearance. So let's take a look at that extender, as well as how you can replace it using jQuery within a client-side page. Here's the rounded corners demonstration page from the AJAX Control Toolkit. So you can see some nice rounded corners there. And you have various options. It's currently using a 6-pixel corner radius. I can up that to 10. I can put it down to 2 or select none. And I can select different corners that this is going to apply to. Because I unchecked the top left and the bottom right, those are now square, but I still have the rounded corners here. And I can do things with changing the border color. All right, so that's fairly functional. And what's interesting is that rounded corners seems to have been an area of particular creativity for jQuery plugin developers, probably because of the cross-browser issues, as well as the lack of a single right way to achieve the effect. The result is that I found a lot of plugins that let you get as creative as you want. I chose one of the simpler plugins to use on the toolkit page. So I'll go ahead and take a look at that. And so here's the rounded corners of my replacement page. So here's a block of text without rounded corners. And then here's a block using that rounded corners plugin that rounds the lower left and the upper right. You can round all the corners, or you have various choices. All right, so here's the HTML that is used for those rounded corners. As you can see, I just have 2 divs that contain a quote from Mark Twain. And then I have a cite element at the bottom. Okay, both use the Twain class just to identify these are the 2 divs that have the Mark Twain quotes. And up here, I have that Twain style. So this styles the div elements, setting the padding to 5 pixels. You need enough padding there between the text and the edges of the box in order to allow the corners to round. And it sets the background color to silver and the width 500 pixels. Now I do have commented out here a border setting. You can include a border, and the plugin will round the border as well if it's displayed on the page. All right, then in order to actually round the corners, have this single statement. It's going to get access to the div rounded element, and then it uses the corners method, that's part of that plugin, in order to round the corners of the top right and the bottom left. And you can include all 4 corners if you want. And there's various other options. And then it also uses this fix IE attribute. This attempts to overcome a problem with some inline elements in Internet Explorer due to how Internet Explorer provides wrong reporting of the width of the element. So that's all you need to do to round corners using that corners plugin. And by the way, I don't think I pointed out that there's the tiny watermark plugin and there's the corners plugin. So I need to include these, and these depend upon the jQuery library, in this case using version 1.5. Many websites allow users to customize the appearance of the site to suit their personal tastes, including setting the color of various elements on the pages. It isn't very user-friendly to force users to enter the hex or RGB values for colors that they want, and even if you did that, you'd have to write some pretty gnarly validation code to make sure they entered a valid color. Even more so if you had to make sure the selected color worked in the site and didn't obscure critical content. Well, very, very difficult to do. ACT has a fairly basic color picker. It's probably one of the lesser developed controls of the set within the toolkit. So let's take a look at that extender and how you can replace it with a very robust plugin used with jQuery. Here's the demo for the color picker on the AJAX Control Toolkit sample pages. You can attach the extender to an ASP.NET text box, and it provides a pop-up window to let the user select from a preset but fairly large number of colors. It has some properties that let you customize it in some pretty basic ways, And support for theming has been promised for quite a long while, as it has for many of the ACT features. So I kind of suspect that theming is never going to become a reality for the Control Toolkit. But overall, it's a fairly basic color picker, and it provides very limited features. All right, again, there are a lot of options for using a jQuery plugin for picking colors. The one that I selected for the sample page is a color picker from Stefan Petra. He describes it as a simple component based on how you select a color in Adobe Photoshop. For being a simple component, it's attractive, well-designed, and quite usable. The user can select a color using any of the controls, going directly on here and moving around, or moving around on this bar here, or you can directly enter values within these various text boxes. And it automatically displays the color that you've selected. And it also generates this hash or this hex value for the colors. So you can directly enter the RGB values or the hue, saturation, and brightness values as well. Now, using this plugin does require a bit of setup to take full advantage of the plugin in a page. But the results, as you can see, are really quite striking. So the page uses the plugin in two different ways. This first one that I've been using is as an element on the page. So it's always visible, lets the user select a color, and they can copy the result from this box down here. Or you can use it within code. The second lets you attach the color picker to an element on the page so that it appears when the user clicks on the element, or in response to any other event that you select. And then it automatically updates the color of the page element. So if I scroll this down, notice that it's automatically updating that value. And I can click outside there, and now the user has changed the appearance of that element. This really is a nice example of a very powerful kind of plugin, which you can do with jQuery. All right, come back over to the sample page and come down here. Here's the HTML that I used for the color picker. The Color Selector 1 div here will have the color picker attached to it so that it appears as an element on the page. That was that first instance of the color picker on the page. And then Color Selector 2 is a little bit more complex because it consists of a pair of nested div elements. So you have these empty div elements right there, and one of which is going to contain a nice image that's provided with the color picker plugin. All right, there's also a div spacer here that I used to just keep the rest of the page a little bit separated from the color picker, so we had that blank spot for the second color picker to appear. So that certainly isn't necessary for the operation of the color picker, but in the sample it keeps it from overlaying the other page elements. All right, a few things you need to do. In particular, the page includes a reference to the colorpicker.css file that is provided with the plugin. This provides all of the styles to set the appearance of the color picker, including to set the various images used in different parts of the picker. There's also a couple of custom styles in the page in order to set the appearance of the Color Selector 2 div element. And those are right there. So this is applying some styling to that element. This is part of what makes up that element that the second color picker on the page is attached to. All right, then the two different color pickers are instantiated in two different code statements. So here's the first one. So it's being attached to Color Selector 1. And it uses the color picker method and provides an option of flat equals true. The flat property causes the plugin to append the color picker to the specified element, which in this case is the Color Selector 1. So it's because of that option setting that that first color picker always appears visible on the page. And then the second instance of the color picker, the one that appears when the user clicks the nested div elements, is a bit more complex. So in this case, it starts by setting the default color. So you can set that to any color. And in this case, it's the same as the initial background color set in the Color Selector 2 div style up here. So it's OOOFF. And if we come up here, there's the background color of that nested div element. Then the function defines custom functions for the onShow, onHide, and onChange events. The first two take care of fading the color picker in and out. And this last one updates the color of the div on the page as the user changes the color in the picker. Again, remember that behavior when this is expanded. As I changed the colors here, it automatically changed the color that appears within that element. So it's that onChange code here that is doing that. And it's just changing the CSS background color property to whatever that hex color property is. So it's really not a lot of code in order to set up and use the color picker. But where it gets a little bit more complex, particularly for jQuery plugin, is that besides referencing the color picker JS and the color picker CSS files in the page and including them in the web project, you also need to include 26 small images in the project. So those are included over in here in this images folder. So these are the images that the plugin uses to display the color picker, the various elements of this page. It's really a rather complex set of controls. So the color picker plugin is a bit complex, but the author includes several samples and all the CSS styles, images, and script files that you need, along with instructions for implementing the plugin. It really is a nice addition to a page when you need to let users pick colors, for whatever reason. It's clearly superior to the ACT version. It's one case where your page is going to be just that much better by using this plugin. Most of the time, when you get text input from users, you want to just get the text without any fancy formatting. An input form that gathers things like the user's name, address, credit card number, and so forth doesn't need any kind of text formatting. You may style the text box, but you don't need to allow the user to bold any text or italicize it or whatever. And in fact, even comments on your blog probably shouldn't allow formatting because of cross-site scripting threats. But there are certainly times when a page needs to provide a rich text editor, letting the user bold and color text, add links, insert images, and so on. Good examples include the user interface for a content management system or a blog post creation page. These kinds of pages need to allow the user to format the text so that it appears all pretty and fancy on the destination web page. ACT includes a pretty decent HTML editor component, implemented as a control rather than as an extender like most of the other features of the toolkit. So let's take a look at that component, as well as how you can replace it within a web page. Here's the ACT demo page for the HTML editor. So as you can see, it has various text in there. I can select things here, make it bold, select some other text, change the font to red, if I can get that. There you go. I can highlight it. I can change the font. Let's change this to Wingdings. Okay. And I can change the size of the font as well. Okay, so it's not exactly Microsoft Word, but it gives the user a lot of options for formatting the text. Certainly plenty enough to use for a blog posting, for example. The nice thing about it is that it has a rich set of toolbar buttons up here that make it easy for the user to format text and insert items, and the control has plenty of properties for customizing its appearance and behavior. Once again, there are a whole bunch of HTML and rich text editing jQuery plugins. You kind of have to be careful when you're searching on them because some of them are listed as HTML editors and others as rich text editing plugins. The one that I selected for this sample page is the CL Editor by Chris Landowski. And the main reason that I chose that one is that it's reasonably full-featured with a reasonable download size, and it's available as a NuGet package directly through Visual Studio. NuGet is a Microsoft extension to Visual Studio that makes it easy to install Microsoft and third-party libraries into a project. So all you need to do is fire up NuGet, search for the CL editor, and then it'll insert that plugin into your project, along with all of the settings and any kind of support files. So there's the CL editor. Now the editor, as its webpage describes, is, quote, an open-source jQuery plugin which provides a lightweight, full-featured, cross-browser, extensible, WYSIWYG HTML editor that can be easily added into any website, end quote. Okay, well, that's a lot to live up to, and I have to tell you, the plugin delivers. The plugin consists of the jQuery.cleditor.js and jQuery.cleditor.min.js script files, along with a cleditor.css style sheet file, and buttons.gif and toolbar.gif image files. To use the plugin, you just have to call the clEditor method on a text area element within the web page. So here's the rich text editor that implements that clEditor control in the sample page. And this has the first few paragraphs of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. And just like the other editor, I can select various things, highlight it in various colors. That wasn't a very good choice. Oh, there we go. I still had it selected, and that hid the effect. Okay, I can change the size of the font for it. I can come over here and bold. I can add links, I can copy and paste, I can print, and so forth. And you have control over the toolbar buttons that actually appear within the editor. The editor itself just really couldn't be any easier to implement on the page. So here's that text. Notice that it's contained within a text area element, and it has an ID of editor, name of editor, and it specifies the size. And then it has the opening paragraphs of Alice in Wonderland. And there's nothing within this HTML to indicate the super editing powers that it's going to gain shortly. All right, come back up to the top here of the page, and you can see that I referenced that jQuery.cleditor.css file. That provides all the styling for the editor. And then all I need to do to change that text area element into a CL editor is to just reference it and call the clEditor method. That's all you need to do in order to add rich text editing to any web page. Now, I will tell you that I had to change the paths in the style sheet to point to the proper location of the two clEditor.gif images in the project. So that was a really easy change to make. And it let me keep the project structure intact because I have all the images in a central location. So, very simple sort of thing to change. Now, you can pass a number of optional settings to the clEditor method, such as to set the width and height of the editing area, change the controls that appear in the toolbar, modify the colors included in the font and text highlight color selection pop-ups. You can specify the available font sizes and styles, and change various other appearance settings. You can also define an update text area and update frame callbacks to convert HTML to source code and vice versa. It really is a very versatile control.